Right.
What seems to define Zenials is this ability to hold contradictions without it feeling
Mm.
weird. You remember the before and the
Mm.
after, which means you're able to see what was gained and what was lost. Perhaps you're not as nostalgic for the past in the same way Gen X might be, since you
Ooh.
genuinely appreciate modern conveniences
That's so
too.
interesting.
If you're a Zenial, you
Wow.
probably feel like you don't quite fit in anywhere. Too young for some things and too old for others, caught between
Hmm.
two worlds. It's not a fault, that's actually the defining feature of your generation's experience.
Right. Today on fellow Gen Z Brit, born in the 2000s, is a very curious man, is going to be checking out the psychology of Xennials. Now, that might be a word that many of you guys have never heard of before. For those guys that aren't aware, Xennials, technical term, is a microgeneration, right? The generation of individuals that were born in between two generations, right? So in this case, it would be the Gen Xers and the millennials. And in the middle part, in that transition, there's this category of individuals who have a unique experience as well that is very nuanced but has its own quirks to it. So for those of you guys watch this right now that are born in the years 1976 to 1985 and you feel like you can't really resonate with Gen X or millennials too closely, this video is for you. Now, guys, look, you guys know I love diving into these intergenerational dynamics and giving you guys my Gen Z perspective. I love learning about different perspectives from different generations. So I'll obviously always love to know how this video resonates with you guys, whatever generation you're watching. But of course, look, with that being said, let's just dive on into this video. Let's go.
There's an entire generation of people who remember both rotary phones and the first iPhone launch, and psychologists can't quite figure out where to put them. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, you're on the tail end of Gen X, but you're hardly a millennial, even though everyone keeps trying to shove you into one of those boxes. You're what researchers started calling a Zenial around 2014, and some sociologists have even labeled this group a microgeneration
Right.
because the window is so specific. What happened during that specific slice of history created something that's genuinely worth examining. So today, we're going to explore what makes them interesting from a psychological perspective. From the
Let's
start,
do
you
it.
spent your childhood in an analog world where boredom was just something you sat with, where you had to actually remember phone numbers, and not to mention the dread if you missed your favorite TV show, it was just gone. Yet one day, right as you were
Can't
moving
relate.
into adulthood, the entire world went digital. Not gradually, suddenly.
Right.
The timing of this shift had consequences that are still playing out.
Mhm.
Most generations grow up entirely in one technology paradigm or other. Zenials, however, went through both of these life-defining experiences during the years when you were still discovering yourself. Your late teens
Mm.
looked very different to your 20s, and the disparity in age was far wider than most generations experience. Consider the
Right.
implications of this on your daily life.
Right.
Remember how much of your teens were spent passing physical notes in class, or having conversations that disappeared into thin air, or making plans where you weren't able to text running late or where are you? You just showed up and hoped your friends would be there. That required a completely different kind of trust and commitment than what exists now. But then you were in your 20s.
I forget. You guys told me all the time. Like when I I have this thing where when I'm thinking about what life was like in the past, I forget that there was no internet. So I'll be thinking, yeah, you guys could have just do this, and I realized, wait a minute, you guys actually had to like tell each other you were gonna be at a certain place at a certain time. You couldn't just ping a message to your friend when you got there. Like you literally had to just hope and pray that they were there when you guys agreed to meet up. And if not, then I don't know. Like, are you getting concerned? Are you calling the police? Like, or are you getting, is that concerning? Or are you just gonna wait there for 30 minutes? It was like a rule. Like, you're gonna wait for 30 minutes. If I don't see you, then I'm just gonna go. I don't know. That's so wild to think about that. That's how people actually would have had to meet back in the day because there was no way of communicating other than like I don't know, going to a payphone. But even then, I don't know. You still had to like go to the payphone, and you don't know where your friend is unless they pick up because they have to be at a pay. Wait, you know what I'm saying? Like it's hard. Sometimes it's hard for me to actually conceptualize a world without the internet. Generally speaking, like shows you how much times have changed.
Disappeared into thin air,
That was
or
in my
making
childhood.
plans where you weren't able to text running late or where are you? You just showed up and hoped your friends would be there. That required a
Wild.
completely different kind of trust and commitment than what exists now. But then you were in your 20s and saw everyone get cell phones. You registered with Friendster, next MySpace, then Facebook.
MySpace.
Prior to social media,
Before
most
my
people
time.
only had 3 different ways to contact someone, either their home or work phone or just by showing up at their house. Then
Crazy.
suddenly you have 17 different messaging apps, and you simply figured it out. During your formative years, you experienced both worlds. According to research on brain development, the prefrontal cortex, the region that mediates our ability to adapt to new situations and learn complex skills, is still maturing until roughly the age of 25.
Right.
A study published in Nature Neuroscience found that this region matures well into the 20s. This means that Zenials were still in this high plasticity window when the
Mm,
technological landscape went through a complete overhaul. You were young enough that picking up new technology felt natural, but old enough to remember what came just before it. Due to being adults when technology first appeared, Gen Xers can sometimes be a bit skeptical of technology. Millennials, particularly the younger ones, have no real memory of life without the internet.
right.
If you're a Zenial, though, you've experienced both things, which has created a kind of bilingualism that is pretty rare. You can
Right.
have a face-to-face conversation without checking your phone every 30 seconds, but you
Okay.
also don't get anxious about learning new software. You remember what it felt like to be genuinely unreachable for
Interesting.
hours at a time, which is an experience a lot of younger people simply don't have.
Wow. Okay. So already you're seeing a little subtle nuance between Gen Xers and Xennials, right? Like Gen Xers, at least from this video, you'd be probably more likely to have a little bit more skepticism of the digital world because you guys would have had more of a foundation in the analog world, whereas the Xennials, you have more of like a fluid kind of approach and a less skeptical approach to dealing with the digital world. Now you were still very much developing throughout that transition, so even there you see there's a little nuance.
Anxious about learning new software. You remember what it felt like to be genuinely unreachable for hours at a time, which is an experience a lot of younger people simply don't have. But you're
Facts.
also not intimidated by technology the way some older generations are. And this shows up in ways
True.
you might not even notice, like you probably have a different relationship with privacy than other generations.
Hmm.
You grew up in a world where your embarrassing moments just faded into memory instead of living forever on social media. That 7th grade haircut, that breakup, that drunk night at a party, there's no photo evidence. It just exists in the stories people tell. This creates a fundamentally different relationship with your past. Your memories could evolve, could become stories, could change shape over time the way human memory naturally works.
Mm.
You weren't trapped by documentation. Research on autobiographical memory suggests that the way we store and recall personal experiences is actually quite fluid. Our brains are designed to edit memories, keep what
Mm.
matters, and let the rest fade. When
Interesting.
everything is permanently documented and searchable, that natural process gets complicated in ways we're still trying to understand. But here's where things
Hmm.
get messy.
That's so
You also
interesting.
entered the job market right around the 2008 financial crisis, which
Ooh.
means a lot of you experienced significant economic instability during the exact years when you were supposed to be establishing your careers. That
Yeesh.
timing matters more than people realize. Research on economic hardship shows that financial trauma during this life stage can have lasting psychological
Right.
effects. People who experience job loss or financial instability during this life stage often carry those experiences
Right.
forward, even after their situations improve. It shapes how you think about money, security, and risk in ways that don't easily go away. So you've got this
That's so
generation that
true.
learned to adapt.
That's so true as well, because especially if something happens to you at a young age where your brain is still forming, developing a prefrontal lobe, all of that science stuff. Yeah, it can definitely have a long lasting effect, and potentially even more so with Xennials because you would have been younger going into that. Maybe some Gen Xers may have been more more older Gen Xers would have been more grounded and structured going through those tumultuous times. At least in comparison, when we're comparing Gen Xers to the Xennials.
Think about money, security, and risk in ways that don't easily go away. So you've got this generation that learned to adapt to massive technological change, but also got economically burned right when you were trying to build stability. You can navigate change because you had to, but you might also have this underlying current of what if it all falls apart again running through your
Hmm.
decision making.
Right.
And nobody really talks about this combination. The cultural conversation about generations tends to pit Gen X against millennials, as if everyone born after 1965 and before 2000 is basically the same. But the specific years you were born in, especially during periods of rapid change, create distinct experiences that don't fit into those broad categories.
Mm.
Zenials deal with a paradox that's honestly pretty unusual. You have the self-reliance and skepticism of Gen X because you grew up before helicopter parenting became standard. Your parents probably didn't
Right.
know where you were for hours at a time, and that was just normal. You learned to solve problems on your own, to entertain yourself, to deal with boredom and frustration without immediate adult intervention. However, you also reached adulthood during the early days of the internet, when technology was still thought to connect everyone and solve everything,
Mm-hmm.
before we all realized that it might be actually making
Right.
some things more complicated.
Right.
It is odd to find yourself there,
Paradox.
independent and cooperative, doubtful yet optimistic, digital but analog.
Right.
What seems to define Zenials is this ability to hold contradictions without it feeling
Mm.
weird. You remember the before and the
Mm.
after, which means you're able to see what was gained and what was lost. Perhaps you're not as nostalgic for the past in the same way Gen X might be, since you
Ooh.
genuinely appreciate modern conveniences
That's so
too.
interesting.
However,
That's
unlike
so
many of the younger
interesting.
generations, you still recognize what we gave up. You lost the ability to be truly alone with your thoughts without effort. You lost the patience that comes from waiting. You lost a certain kind of presence that existed when there wasn't always something else competing for your attention. But you gained connection, information, and possibilities your younger self couldn't have imagined. If you're a Zenial, you
Wow.
probably feel like you don't quite fit in anywhere. Too young for some things and too old for others, caught between
Hmm.
two worlds. It's not a fault, that's actually the defining feature of your generation's experience.
Right.
In a world that keeps changing faster than anyone can predict, having lived through one massive transition might be one of the most valuable things you could have learned.
Hmm.
You've adapted to a transitional lifestyle. The environment in which you were raised doesn't necessarily have to be the one in which you live forever. The Zenial experience is worth knowing about because of that, more than anything.
Right.
Not because you're special in some superior way, but because you lived through a specific moment in history that taught you something the rest of us are still trying to figure out: how to adapt without losing yourself in the process. If this
Hmm.
resonated with you, I'd really appreciate you subscribing.
Wow.
And if you want to help me keep making content like this, consider becoming a channel member. Your support
Wow. Okay. Yes, I feel like we really started to get the pictures, especially towards the end when it comes to painting the picture for the Xennial, the typical Xennial, right? Like you grew up during a transitional period, so you're more kind of fluid, like malleable. Like you're not as you're kind of like in the middle in a sense. Like you're not you're kind of more inclined to be adaptable, and you're okay with being adaptable, and you're more comfortable with holding onto the past, but then at the same time not neglecting the future, which potentially Gen Xers might have a traditionally harder time, letting go of the past than an Xennial would have. And maybe a slightly harder time embracing the future than an Xennial would. Like whereas an Xennial will kind of find it a little bit easier, kind of holding both in their own merit to a degree, which is so interesting. And that's such a nuanced point, right? That which is why I talk about all the time on the channel. Like when we were talking about generations, like because there's these, like, of course you got the generalizations, but like underneath that you got these different categories and nuances with the micro generations that are also worth looking into and may even better explain why a lot of you guys who may be Xennials feel and think the way you do about certain things about the past and the future. And let me know if any of you guys weren't aware of that, this whole micro generation thing. Maybe this is the first time some of you guys have heard about it. Maybe this whole time you thought you were a Gen Xer or even a millennial and you realize, wait a minute, Xennial better describes me. I'd love to know if there's any of you guys that literally fit that right now in the comments below. Let me know. Because obviously this is something that obviously the younger generations, millennials downwards, aren't really going to be able to relate to at all when it comes to that analog world. And yeah, I have no reference for life without the internet. It's always interesting as well to see how you guys interact with some of the things I say, because even exposes to myself as well how much I am a product of a digital world. Because I have no clue what it was like back in the day, which is hence why this channel even was born, because I love looking back. I love being curious and finding out more, especially about the world before I was born. Enough of the jibber jabber. Look, shout out to you guys that actually watch through the end and don't just click off as soon as the video ends. Look, I appreciate you guys. That's why I love seeing those hearts. Look, comment down a yellow heart or hashtag flexer so I know who my real ones are who made this point in the video. You guys are the rest of the role. As well as smash the like button if you enjoyed the video. Hype this video and the YouTube feature. Always does me a big favor and support me on the channel. And don't forget to subscribe if you guys are new here. But if you guys want to see some more psychological related videos to other generations, especially my reaction that I did to the Psychology of Gen X, then I'll have that video pop up at the end of this one. But of course, guys, look, with that being said, I'm your boy JayFlex, and I'll see you wonderful people in the next one. Peace.